They think that they don't need us. Here's the fact. We, the South, are the fourth richest economy in the world by ourselves. We, the South, account for 80% of all the exports of the United States. We in the South have a labor force that's worth more than all the railroads and banks and the factories of the North combined. We don't need you. You don't want us. You look down your nose at us morally. We would say, we're gone. And so South Carolina over to Texas, within weeks after Lincoln's election, create the Confederate States of America, and by January, those 7 states are out. But that's still not going to bring slavery to an end. There's another critical step. What's the largest slave state in 1860? Virginia. Okay? People today, it's the Mid-Atlantic, right? But it was the largest slave state in 1860, and my new city of Richmond was a hub in the slave trade, and places all around here would have been feeding young people into the maw of the slave trade. They've been gathered in Richmond, processed through banking and insurance and clothes, and then sold and distributed all across the South. So Virginia has a deep investment in slavery. But Virginia says we're not like the hotheads down in South Carolina. We are not like the hotheads in Georgia. We are the mother of presidents. We're the home of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. We're going to have an election. And every county in the Commonwealth will send delegates to Richmond, and we will decide what we're going to do. And all those counties sent delegates to Richmond, most of them with the mission of saving the United States. And they come there to Richmond, and they believe that they will be able to figure out some kind of compromise that will keep slavery in place and keep the Union together, just what the yellow counties want to do. Well, they come into Richmond, and pretty soon people start burning bonfires in the streets, saying, "Come on, you old grannies, let's go. Let's join this new nation. I'm tired of the Yankees my whole life, sort of looking down their nose at us. If they don't want us, let's go." But the men inside the hall, older, had known what it took to build this nation. We're not so easily swayed to give it away. And they voted over and over and over again to stay in the United States. Well, the delegates, basically the lobbyists from the Confederate States of America, are writing back home, Virginia's not going to do anything until we force her to. Firing on Fort Sumter is designed to do that. Virginia still won't secede. Let's see why. We'll figure out why. Now, so one of the things that we've done is you would think after all these, I don't know where the other, you might see there it is. I've got a very interesting, there we go. So still 150 years later, we're still arguing about why did the South secede? And people just feel certain on one side or the other. Well, it was just this or it was just that. And, you know, you see how complicated things are today. Why would we think they were simpler back then? So we digitized all 3,000 pages of the debates, which gives you some idea of how up in the air this was and when it dragged on for months and months. And so you can, and all these things are online at dsl.richmond.edu, Digital Scholarship Lab. And, if you go there and we can search for a word, and, I'll just go ahead and tell you that if we search for tariff, and some people say, the Civil War is just about economics, it's mentioned 85 times or something. But let's see if they actually mention slavery very much. So we'll do slave asterisk. No, that's not. It would be S3, wouldn't it? I'll assure you that I'm pushing the L, and it is appearing as a. I'm guessing they didn't mention S3 AVE very much. I don't know how to do this without an L. I will just tell you what happens. Somebody's playing with my head up here today. Okay, and now can I do the asterisk? No, apparently. Could you add an asterisk? If yes. All right. Okay, I feel very powerful here. All right. Okay. Oh, I do not really want to add this software to your computer. But what it does, if I just close it, once I ease over there with this, And what it shows is what it would have done, it would have drawn a map and filled in all the counties. And what you've seen is the people from those counties talked about slavery from West Virginia to East Virginia. But you can see here already, they mention it 1,432 times. And you can go there and each one of these things below show you exactly how they mention it. And I will give you a hint. They're not saying, hey, let's abolish slavery. They're saying, how can we protect this? Now, they're torn. We don't want to trivialize this. They do not want to leave the United States, but they want to keep slavery. But they recognize South Carolina has maneuvered them into a box. If the 7 Deep South states secede, what's Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee's, North Carolina's representation in Congress now? It's very weak. And so they're boxed in. And so, but even with the firing on Fort Sumter, they will not vote to secede. It's when Lincoln says, I need troops to put down this illegal rebellion in South Carolina. Then Virginia has to decide, and crying, some of them, they vote to leave. This is the beginning of the end of slavery. Without secession, without the creation of a separate nation, or of a would-be separate nation, without putting the constitutional protections at risk, there's no prospect for the end of slavery anytime soon. Slave prices had never been higher. Enslaved people had never been used in a broader range of economic pursuits. And matter of fact, a lot of white Southerners are saying, it's about time for us to take Cuba. It's about time for us to go to Central America. We have figured out the formula by which you can be the main engine of the world economy, we have a monopoly over the single most valuable commodity in the world. And we figured out a way to keep this under control and to Christianize our slaves, as they say. So Virginia reluctantly secedes. Tennessee, North Carolina follow. And as a result, you have the two warring sides balanced just long enough to fight as long as possible. If Virginia had not gone, the Civil War would have had a quite different outcome than it does. Virginia, some of them said, if there's going to be a war, where do we think it will be waged? And so some of them knew that the rivers of the Commonwealth would be running with blood, and they did this anyway. So that is one way that slavery begins to end. Another way begins almost immediately. So this is in April of 1861. In May of 1861, 3 African-American men row across the harbor at Hampton Roads to the United States fort that's still in Union hands down there, to Benjamin Butler, and say, we're on your side. Think about this. Virginia secedes in April. In May, slavery, which had started in that exact place in 1619 in North America, begins to unravel within weeks. After centuries of slavery being held in place, at the first opportunity of having an ally nearby, enslaved people say, we must bring this to an end. Within a year, 10,000 enslaved people have fled to Hampton, okay, and said, we finally have allies. And Edmund Ruffin, who had traveled down from Virginia to South Carolina to fire the first shot at Fort Sumter, writes in his diaries, the absconding of our slaves is beyond belief. We told ourselves for generations that they loved us, that they were happy with slavery. And now, at the first opportunity, it's beginning to unravel. So the second hand beginning to undo slavery is that of the enslaved men who took the risk to see what would happen. Then, military history. George McClellan knows he's going to bring this war to an end. They thought that Manassas thing would work out, but it didn't. So then, okay, we're going to have to take Richmond. And they're going to come up the peninsula. And as they start doing so, several things happen. The United States Army discovers that African Americans are coming to their aid. And even if they don't come behind their lines, they're the ones saying, that's how you get across the creek. Go up that way. This is where that road cuts across. You can't trust that white man in that house. I don't care what he told you. And they write back home, the colored people are intelligent and they're on our side. But as they work up the peninsula, the Union soldiers discover something else, that they are running up against fortifications in which they are dying that had been dug by the forced labor of slave men. That the barricades on which the young men of Vermont or Massachusetts or Michigan are throwing themselves have been dug with forced labor. And while you all know what the Virginia heat is like in June or July of doing that, and those young northern men are dying in the malarial swamps of the peninsula, the Confederacy is able to use 4 million enslaved people, not only to feed the army, but also now to build the fortifications. And even they report, they see them having guns at their heads, forcing them to fire as well. So this is another hand that leading to emancipation, that we are not going to be able to defeat the Confederacy until we destroy slavery, but the enslaved people themselves could be great allies. So those are two strong pressures in going different ways. So, but slavery is still a long way, despite the slight loosening of that knot, still a long way from being really in danger. Who plays the next critical role? Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. How do they do that?
Driving McClellan down the peninsula.
Exactly. They drive. Don't give away all my best lines.
Actually, it's not hard to do, you know. People speculate about what would happen if Joe Johnson had never been wounded there, and he and McClellan continued to face each other off. They'd probably still be in it today.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but since that didn't, we know what did happen, and I can talk about that, which is that McClellan is driven away. Now, as that's happening, as McClellan's coming up the peninsula, what people in the North think should be, with 100,000 men, largest army in Northern America history, to destroy the Confederacy, they're saying we better hurry up and make whatever progress we can against slavery, because once that happens, then we've lost our momentum. It turns out they needn't have worried. McClellan loses, and the war drags on. If the war had not dragged on, there's no reason to think that it would not have come to some kind of negotiated end with some slower end to slavery. We can debate how long slavery could have gone on and so forth, but the thing is, it would not have ended as it did with the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation and the Emancipation Proclamation. So you think about that fails, and then the other failures, and then Antietam is enough of a victory. Lincoln says that we can issue this now and it won't sound like a shriek of defeat, the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. And then what's going to happen? As the story becomes clearer and clearer that the draft is running into resistance in the North, that the number of white Northern men who are willing to fight for slavery is certainly uncertain. But the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, African American men can fight for the United States. They've been held at bay for 2 years by now. But now with that beginning, and with incredible loyalty to a nation that had betrayed them so badly in slavery and in the injustice in the North, come to the defense of the United States. More African American men fight for the United States Army than all the soldiers at Gettysburg, to put things in the kind of perspective. Okay? This is huge numbers. So who's the next hand that ends slavery? It's the hands of black soldiers who are playing a critical role. And every time the lesson the North is getting, even though it's quite resistant a lot of the times, is that African Americans are remarkably loyal, patriotic, and brave Americans who deserve freedom. Now, we love thinking about Abraham Lincoln and his role in all this and the growth and how he grows. And we know that he talks about colonization, and the historians are debating this. Does he really mean that? Or is that just to keep the Democrats off his back while he's getting ready to do this radical thing with the Emancipation Proclamation? He talks to a delegation of black ministers and says things that really jar to our ears as, at best, racially tone deaf. Is that really for them, or is that for the Democratic newspapers so that he can get away with doing this radical thing he's going to do? We don't know. We don't know what was in Abraham Lincoln's mind. And people who want to give him the benefit of the doubt see it as shrewd politics. Other people say he was never really committed to our freedom. He did this as a military end. We won't be able to settle that today. What I really want to think about is the context in which he's working. And I think maybe this is an important element of that. This is kind of like a game show. I don't know what I'm going to get when I click on things, you know. So let's see what this one's going to be. I know what I think it is. Yes? Election of 1864. This is the turning point in the Civil War. And many things that we think of as military history are actually directed toward shaping this event. Why would Lee come to Gettysburg? Part is to show the white North that Lincoln cannot protect them, that Lincoln should not be president, and that somebody more reasonable should be. So things that in some ways don't really make sense to us make sense if you understand that they're reading the newspapers every day, and they're fighting over the public opinion in the North and the South, as well as over the armies in the field. In August of 1864, Abraham Lincoln does not think he's going to be renominated by his own party. In August of 1864, if you're a little shaky on your Civil War history, that's after Gettysburg. That's after the Gettysburg Address. That's before the fall of Atlanta, Mobile Bay, and the Shenandoah Valley. And people in his own party say, sir, we just don't think that you have the confidence of the nation to win the election. Lincoln says, what do you say we change the name of the party to the Union Party? And what do you say we get a loyal Southerner from Tennessee to be my vice president? What's the worst that could happen? Yeah, kind of a history geek joke. Okay, take a little while to think about it.
Please don't go to Fourth Theater.
That's right. And so, but then, in that fall, we do know what does happen. Atlanta does fall. Mobile Bay does fall. Shenandoah Valley does fall. And Lincoln wins. Now, the story usually goes, all right, now it's downhill. Let's think about this. This map shows all the blue counties would not vote for Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War after these great victories. 1 million men